Mark from the States, Mark from the States, it's Mark from the United States.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Mark from Yes. How are we doing today? I'm doing fantastic. I hope you are as well. Thank you so much for coming. Today's video is by Redcoat History, and right below me are two links. One goes right to the channel, one will go right to this video. I encourage you to go watch this video without me talking. Just click on that link and you can go, and you're supporting the original content creator. Come back and then watch with me, and you can add context to the things I'm inevitably going to miss, right? This is how this works. It's perfect. You guys get to add so much more to what I've watched, and I do, like I've always said, I do the bulk of my learning from all of you after we watch together in the comments and in my email, which is also in the description. So please support Redcoat History. It is important that you do so, and if you haven't subscribed to them, please go over and subscribe to them. Nothing better. I am telling you, that is the greatest thing to hear in comments when I hear that all of you, or whoever at the time, said they've also subscribed to the channel we're watching. It's just perfect. And he puts a lot of work into these things, and I really enjoy his channel. I know a lot of you do. I get a lot of requests. And today's video, very interesting. It's about the legendary Para who fought the SS with an umbrella at Arnhem. I think I've heard maybe bits of this story, referencing this story. Who knows? I may even have heard the actual story. I don't remember, and I won't know until I start watching. But I'm excited to learn something today. So I encourage you to come sit with me here on this big fake couch. You know the drill. It's big, it's fake, it can hold all of you, and come dressed however you want. Bring food, drink, whatever. It's good. We're going to learn something today, and yeah, what could be better, right? All right, let's do it. Here we go.
Fighting is saddened. The area is laced and fraught by shell and mortar fire, and pockets of enemy troops are everywhere.
That's awesome.
You're going to enjoy today's story. It's a bit of World War II, and it's a soldier so crazy he carried an umbrella into battle.
Right.
He was described by his colleagues as marvelously mad and very brave. It's all about Arnhem this week, isn't it? Yep, it's been 80 years since that famous battle in World War II. Perhaps you saw the epic film about it, A Bridge Too Far. The movie's now a classic, and it has many standout scenes, including this one.
We haven't the proper facilities to take you all prisoner. What? We'd like to, but we can't accept your surrender.
I love that. Well, that character is Major Harry Carlyle's 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, played by Christopher Good. But the on-screen umbrella-wielding major was a composite character with a fictional name, and the actions of 2 or 3 men were amalgamated into one. So who was the real Parachute Regiment major with the umbrella? Well, unlike Major Carlyle, the real man didn't die at the bridge. He played a lead role in the battle, was wounded and captured, and then later escaped to lead a mass evacuation of stranded paratroopers across the Rhine. Now that's some man. His action...
Anybody know who it is before it gets revealed here? I'm sure a lot of you do.
Would earn him the DSO, Distinguished Service Order, a man amongst men. Step forward, Major Alison Digby Tatham Water. Yep, it's a hell of a name. Conjures up an image of a stereotypical posh English gentleman, and that's exactly what he was, but with an added twist. Standing over 6 feet tall, with a thin frame and a confident demeanour with a dry sense of humour, Digby, as he was known, enjoyed a drink, liked a fight, and was known for his particularly colourful language, classic Brit. It's fair to say that Digby was an out-and-out eccentric. In fact, a fellow officer called him marvellously mad and very brave. One of his men, Private Steve Morgan, described him as being as mad as a hatter. Another, Sergeant Neville Ashley, called him a nutter, adding he was a good bloke, as brave as could be. So let's take a quick look at Digby's background. Born in 1917, he was the son of a wealthy landowner from Shropshire who served with the Royal Fusiliers and later with the King's Shropshire Light Infantry during the First World War. But Digby's lively and eccentric traits seem to have come from his mum. In fact, his siblings inherited the same traits. This became clear during the Second World War. For a start, his sister Kit became a member of the Hadfield Spears Ambulance Unit and served in several theatres of the war. In North Africa, she was awarded the French Croix de Guerre for driving through machine gun fire to rescue wounded French soldiers. My gosh. Digby's brother, Major John de Grey Tatham-Water, also served in Africa with the Queen's Bays. He was awarded the Military Cross for his gallantry during the Battle of Gazala, where he'd gone into action on the back of his
decorated
tank,
family,
sat on a canvas chair. Yep, bonkers, but incredibly brave. Inevitably, John was killed during the Second Battle of El Alamein, decapitated by a shell. It said at the time he was standing upright on the top of his tank. Risk-taking clearly ran in the Tatham-Water family. But what of Digby himself? Well, commissioned into the Indian Army in 1937, he was attached to the 2nd Battalion, Ox and Bucks Light Infantry. They were stationed in India, and what was initially meant to be a one-year attachment to the battalion from the Indian Army turned out to be a permanent transfer. Digby loved his time in India and was able to take part in his favourite pastimes. Yeah, those good old ones of hunting, pig sticking and polo. Classic things posh people like. I've never done any of them, though they do look great fun. Following the outbreak of the Second World War, the battalion initially remained in India, but finally they were transferred back to the UK. Digby, as you can imagine, was desperate for action, but a lengthy period of training followed. He was not impressed. During this time, an officer by the name of John Howard joined the battalion. Howard would later become known for leading the assault on Pegasus Bridge prior to the D-Day beach landings.
Major Howard, I cannot overestimate the importance of your task. The Orne River Bridge must be captured before the enemy can destroy it.
He was a proud working-class man who'd been promoted through the ranks. Howard had a hard time connecting with the upper-class officers, particularly Digby, who he referred to as an upper-class pongo. He went further, saying, "Damn them all to hell with their double-barreled names and their family forebears. It made me more aggressive and, unfortunately, inclined to be prejudiced against anyone with an upper-class name or manner."
Wasn't he involved with the SAS? I thought, maybe I'm getting confused here. I anticipate the correction.
When I was younger, I used to feel the same way, but as I've got older, I've realised these posh lads are often really good dudes. Howard eventually came to realise the same thing. He said later, "In the days that followed, I had a chance to know Digby Tatham-Water better and realised not for the first time that I'd been wrong in my initial assessment of him as an upper-class pongo. He was, in fact, an easygoing chap with an attractive manner, and to my surprise, I found myself liking him. So when Digby suggested we go to the flicks, i.e. the films, the cinema, I agreed. Much to Howard's surprise, the two men soon became good friends. But their time together in the Ox and Bucks was not to last. Fed up with the constant training, Digby sought to get into the action quicker by joining the parachute regiment. That was in the thick of the fighting in North Africa at the time. The paratroopers, or Red Devils as the Germans called them, had earned a reputation as fierce fighters, and the unit was, and still is, considered elite. Now, as a new fully fledged paratrooper, Digby sailed for North Africa to find the airborne division had actually moved to Sicily and Italy. And then shortly after he joined them, they were ordered back to the UK to be refitted and reinforced. As you can imagine, Digby was furious. Perhaps that's why he had a habit of getting into fistfights with his comrades. Digby's Brigadier General Lathbury described him as taking part in drunken brawls pretty much as soon as he arrived. He said that
that's not actual footage. It's some Wild West barroom brawl.
Digby would occasionally smash up the barroom furniture and engage in wild fistfights with friends that would be forgotten the next morning. Another classic British trait.
Johnson, come on, Mr. Ferris miles ahead, let's catch him up.
In England, the battalion was stationed in Grantham. I've got family there, and Digby was given command of A Company. He pushed his men hard in training, but showed leniency when they stepped out of line. Instead of putting them on a charge, he would fight them in the boxing ring, and all would be forgotten. His men loved it. Who wouldn't love a chance to hit an officer? Due to his distrust of radios, he introduced a bugle system for communications between the platoons within his company. With admirable foresight, these bugles would prove useful in the street fighting at Arnhem, where the radios didn't work.
Oh, wow.
Now, after many months of training and a series of cancelled operations, the 1st Airborne Division finally, much to Digby's relief, took part in Operation Market Garden. Digby's battalion, 2 Para, parachuted into Holland on the 17th September 1944. Their objective was to fight their way through to Arnhem Road Bridge, which, according to the plan, they were to hold for 48 hours until relieved by the ground forces of 30 Corps. By now, Digby was like a coiled spring. The war had been going for 5 years and he'd yet to fire a shot in anger. Perhaps that's why his CO, Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, gave Digby the responsibility of leading the push for the bridge. In his book, A Drop Too Many, Frost referred to Digby as a thruster and would later say that he was worth a bet with anyone's money. Frost was clearly a good judge of character. Now, before we get into the details of the fight at Arnhem, I just wanted to thank my mate Neil Thornton, who researched and wrote this episode. He's written a book about Digby, so I'll put a link to that in the description below for anyone who wants to go deeper into the man's life story. Anyway, let's get back to it. And as you may already know, the Battle of Arnhem was a bit of a nightmare. By sheer bad luck, a strong armoured force of German Waffen-SS troops was stationed close to the drop zone. For lightly armed airborne infantry, that was a sticky situation to be in, to say the least. But with sheer dash, bravery and good old-fashioned British pluck, the paratroopers fought their way through 8 miles of enemy-held territory. Digby's A Company led the way to the bridge, reaching it around 8 p.m. that night. In the process, they'd brushed all opposition aside, destroyed several enemy vehicles, and accounted for 150 enemy soldiers, most of them SS. Frost called it a very fine feat of arms. At the bridge, the men began to position themselves in the houses surrounding it, but their numbers were worryingly thin. A full brigade was meant to defend the bridge for just 48 hours, but owing to heavy opposition, just 700 to 750 men reached it. Despite this, they would fight on from Sunday to Thursday without relief. In the absence of Brigadier Lathbury, who was unable to reach the bridge, Lieutenant Colonel Frost took command of the entire force and handed command of the battalion to Major Wallace. When Wallace was killed the day after they arrived, command of the battalion passed on to Digby. From this moment on, Digby was responsible for men spread around the full stretch of the perimeter, and he would make it his personal mission to visit them all. It was about this time that Digby seemed to find an umbrella in one of the shelled houses by the bridge and decided to carry it around with him.
Why the hell do you always carry that bloody umbrella?
Memory.
In the movie A Bridge Too Far, Major Carlyle, when asked why he carried the umbrella, said that it was because he couldn't remember passwords and that carrying it would prove he was an Englishman. It's a great scene, but it isn't true. Digby had no issue remembering passwords. In later life, when asked why he carried it, Digby said that it was, quote, good for morale, but there was more to it than that. I wanted my troops to recognise me at all times and to be conscious of my presence. Well, Digby certainly achieved that.
Okay.
Many men gave their own stories of seeing Digby with his umbrella. As mortar rounds landed around the position, Battalion Padre, Father Egan, was cowering in a doorway trying to pluck up the courage to dash across the street when he saw someone approaching. He later said, outside strolling up the street was Major Digby Tatham Water, one of the Colonel's company commanders. He saw me and started walking over. In his hand was an umbrella. As he came to me, he opened it and held it over my head. Come along, Padre, he said, and taking me by the arm began to lead me along. When I showed signs of reluctance, he said, oh, don't worry, I've got an umbrella. It must have looked like he was helping some old lady across the street. He acted as if he was just out for a stroll, but I know I was wishing that he'd hurry up.
Oh my God.
Lieutenant Pat Barnett was sprinting across a stretch of ground when he spotted Digby strolling down the road with his umbrella raised over his head. Somewhat taken aback by this peculiar sight, Barnett informed Digby that his umbrella wouldn't do him any bloody good. In an exaggerated expression of mock surprise, Digby answered back, oh my goodness, Pat, but what if it rains? As the days wore on and casualties continued to mount, more and more houses held by the paratroopers became untenable. Some were literally blown to bits, others burned fiercely. It was getting dark. Captain Llewellyn Jones of the 1st Air Landing Anti-Tank Battery was with several men in a house. The upper story was ablaze and the fire was spreading. Soon they would be burnt out. Llewellyn Jones was at the entrance with his men trying to decide what to do and where to go when he saw a mysterious figure approach. Llewellyn Jones likened Digby's sudden appearance to that of a spiritual apparition. It was raining slightly, he said. He had a black umbrella. Under it was a discerning figure. But only as he came closer did we realise it was a parachute battalion officer. He came to us at the door and said, how are you chaps getting on? 30 Corps are on the way and should be with us tomorrow. So we just have to hang on through tomorrow and then we should be okay. Glad to see you're in good heart. Keep up the good work.
Huh.
With that, Digby turned away from the door and walked quietly and methodically back across the road. Surprisingly, Digby wasn't shot at. Llewellyn Jones thought that the Germans must have assumed Digby was an eccentric old woman blundering about. After this, Llewellyn Jones and his men found the courage to make a run for it, but enemy fire accounted for 2 of the 5 that tried, so the Germans were clearly watching. On the Wednesday, when Digby found out that some of his men in a house close to the bridge had been forced out by enemy tanks and infantry, he immediately left his HQ to see for himself what was going on. By this point, he'd added a further, albeit temporary, accessory to his inventory, a bowler hat. Bizarre but true. Major Gough, downhearted at the British situation and witnessing
I love
German
that
Mark
picture
IV
right
tanks
there.
thundering down the street, firing into the buildings at point-blank range, had his spirits lifted when he saw Digby. He said, "I looked and then looked again. There, out on the street, was Tatham Water leading his men. He'd found an old bowler someplace and he was walking along, twirling a battered umbrella, looking for all the world like Charlie Chaplin." Digby then ordered a counterattack which was successfully carried out and the house retaken. Enemy tanks would account for many casualties though, including Digby himself, who was knocked unconscious for 8 hours when one fired point-blank range into a room he was in.
Whoa.
He was dragged out and placed in a cellar with the other wounded. But when he woke up, he told the other casualties that he had had enough of lying on his back, and with that he jumped up and headed back out into the street. Unbelievable, isn't it? What a soldier. On the Wednesday, a truce was arranged to remove the hundreds of wounded from the burning headquarters buildings. Amongst the number was John Frost and many other officers of the battalion. Digby was furious, though, when the SS used the truce to move their positions closer. He sent an officer, Captain Hoyer Miller, who could speak German, to complain. Approaching an SS officer, Hoyer Miller described the conversation that followed. "I warned him that if his men continued, we might have to open fire. He in turn kept stressing that there was no hope for us and that we should surrender. I told him there was no chance of that." Perhaps it was at this moment that the last radio message was sent from the bridge. The message, which is often attributed to Digby, was not picked up by any British units, sadly, but by the Germans nearby. It ended with the defiant words, "Out of ammo, God save the King." The paratroopers would fight on, but it was clear to everyone that the battle could only end one way. After the truce expired, Digby and the survivors were showered with grenades. They carried out a bayonet charge to take a large building, which then proved untenable. After more desperate fighting and with no other option available, Digby gave one final order: every man for himself. Digby hid in an old aqueduct through the night, but was found by the SS the next morning and taken to a church with the other prisoners. A group of Dutch boys were carrying wounded paratroopers to trucks to be sent to hospital. Digby, who was battered and bruised and his clothes torn to shreds, looked badly wounded and managed to get himself a place on the truck. His aim was simple: escape at the earliest opportunity, and that's exactly what he did.
No
That
way.
night, he jumped from his window in the hospital and set off. He didn't know where he was going, but he was determined that it wouldn't be a prisoner of war camp. Eventually, Digby made contact with the Dutch resistance. He teamed up with a guy called Bill Wildeboer, the underground leader of the district, and stayed in a secret dugout in his garden. Digby would remain with the Wildeboers for a whole month.
For his dash and skill during the Battle of the Bridge, and then his brilliant and successful operation helping 130 other armed soldiers to escape through German lines, Tatham Water was awarded the DSO, Distinguished Service Order.
And if you're wondering just how Digby managed to gather 130 airborne evaders from under the noses of the Germans, simple. He had the resistance make him a fake ID to show the Germans when challenged. And so Major Digby Tatham Water became Peter Jansen, a deaf and dumb Dutchman from The Hague. With fake ID in hand and his natural confidence and swagger, he was free to ride around the country on a bicycle in cheap Dutch clothes. Digby never forgot those Dutchmen and women who helped him and his comrades. Bill Wildeboer, his wife Hill, and their children Hilly and Dickie would remain lifelong friends, and their families are still in touch to this day. Now, Arnhem was Digby's first and only action of the war. He tried to be parachuted back into Holland to attempt a second evacuation of other paratroopers who were still trapped. But permission was denied. Post-war, after a miserable spell in Palestine, Digby left the paratroopers and moved to Kenya. He purchased a farm and met his future wife, Jane. Together they had 3 daughters. His time in Kenya was full of excitement and adventure. He loved to sail and fish. He played polo and was captain of the national team. Of course, why not? He ran a safari company and a training school where children were taught to ride and jump. In the 1950s, Kenya, of course, had its own problem with the Mau Mau rebellion against the British. Digby raised a mounted contingent consisting of local men that included most of his polo team. Digby and his men patrolled the mountains and forests and saw some sharp fighting. Digby was known as the Galloping Major and his unit as the Mau Mounties. Funnily enough, the parachute regiment was based near his home and he spent a lot of time there in their camp as a VIP. The young paras understandably worshipped him. Interestingly, many others from his past also ended up in Kenya. John Frost used to visit him with his family and wanted to move there. His wife wouldn't allow it. His old brigadier, Gerald Lathbury, who had stayed in the army, spent time in Kenya as the CIC during the Mau Mau Rebellion. His family spent a lot of time with the Tatham Waters and they were very close. Now, Digby Tatham Water died in 1993, aged 75. He'd always been a heavy smoker and he spent the last year of his life, sadly, hooked up to oxygen in his bed to help him breathe. It was a sad end for a man whose life was so full of energy and excitement.
That's incredible. 1993? Wow. He lived quite... What a... Well, exciting, I guess, if you're into that sort of thing, but what an amazing life. Unreal. Kenya. I know back then it's not, but just, yeah, I was never expecting him going to Kenya, of all places, but interesting.
To support the channel, please like, comment, subscribe.
Yes.
A shocking 80% of viewers aren't subscribed, and that really hurts the growth of the channel.
Yes, it does.
Also, you can purchase one of these lovely t-shirts via the links in the description. YouTube thinks you'll enjoy the video on screen now, so check it out. And I'll be back next week with more incredible stories from British military history. I'll see you then.
That was incredible. Absolutely incredible. I honestly, I don't know how the movie needed to, bring in a different people to make the one character of Carlisle when you had this gentleman. What a career he had, and he obviously came from a very well-decorated family. It's just the story is incredible. One of the things I love when I watch the March Past on Remembrance Sunday, and I know most of you have seen it, but if there are any of you out there who have not watched it, it is required viewing. To see all these men and women with pride on their faces marching, it's just, they're thinking about lost loved ones and so on. And but I love seeing the few of them that are in the bowler hat with the umbrellas. It's just incredible. But it's definitely a must watch if there are any of you who haven't seen it. It's incredible, and it's just so emotional, and it really keeps you grounded. Great story. Please, if you have one like and one subscription to give today, please go give it to Redcoat History. I hope everybody's happy, healthy, and safe. Please let me know about John Howard. I'm kicking myself right now trying to remember. I know there's probably a few of you out there screaming at the computer, at the screen. You knucklehead. Anyway, thanks for putting up with the heater. Take care, buddy. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Mark from the States, Mark from the States, it's Mark.